Okay, hi everyone and welcome to our webinar. My name is Sandra Bonet and I'm the Marketing Campaign Specialist here at Automate Pro. And today we are joined by our trusted partner Flyform, and together we're going to be discussing ServiceNow testing best practices. Throughout the webinar, if you have any questions, please do feel free to pop them into the chat box and our presenters will answer them at the end during the Q&A section. And also we'll be running 2 polls throughout the session, so please do engage. I hope you enjoy the webinar and I'll now pass on to our presenters to introduce themselves.
Well, thank you, Sandra. I'm Shiva Scullion, Lead Solution Consultant with Automate Pro. I'll pass on to my colleague, Chris.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Chris Bruno, Director of Quality Assurance at Automate Pro. I've been with the company about 4 years now. I have quite a strong quality assurance background, very focused on testing. So what I focus on is helping and kind of guiding ServiceNow customers with testing. If you stick around to the end, I'll do a product demo as well. Over to you, Pam.
Oh, sorry, Pamela, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Hi, I'm Pam Waterhouse. I'm a service delivery manager for the managed services team at Flyform, and I also have a role as a business analyst on the professional services side. I've only been with Flyform for a few months, but I've been working in the ServiceNow space primarily as a business analyst for about 10 years. At Flyform, we just do ServiceNow. We have managed services, platform services, professional services, but our focus is ServiceNow only. We're one of the very few pure play ServiceNow consulting firms and also an elite ServiceNow partner. Thanks.
Just to give a brief overview of what we'll be covering today, we're going to look a little at the current state of both ServiceNow and the sort of testing within it. Talk a little about how we can build and execute automated tests, look a little around maintenance documentation, and then finally we'll give a little descriptor of what Automate Pro offers in this sphere and what we can hopefully help you with. Passing on to Pamela to talk a few of the common customer pain points.
Yes, so in terms of what we see at clients, if I first talk to frequent upgrades, so keeping up with them. They happen frequently. They're at least once a year. Some clients like to do them every 6 months, so they shouldn't really come as a shock. But the reality is that they sometimes do. When Flyform work with clients, we have a strict schedule and plan that we adhere to. It's quite prescriptive, but obviously varies from client to client depending upon their implementation. But like I say, many companies do get caught out. But I guess until you've been through an upgrade yourself, you don't really fully comprehend, how much is involved. And like I say, the effort, it varies hugely depending upon the size of your implementation. The last place I worked at, we had a global implementation of multiple modules for multiple business services. And we did our upgrades once a year, and prior to putting in some test automation, it really was a bit of a beast. It took quite a lot of time, and most of the ServiceNow team had to kind of plan to down tools and get involved in that. So depending on the size of your implementation and where you want to take the platform, if you're not working with a managed service provider or you have no test and automation in place, then the time frame for your upgrades risk being pushed out. I mean, like I say, we were quite reliant upon business stakeholders, to do that post-upgrade validation from a business process perspective. And with the best will in the world, when you're reliant on business stakeholders, they have their own jobs. So the testing of your upgrade may not be their first priority. But the reality is that, you don't really need to be caught out. With a tool like Automate Pro, you can embed it into the platform. You can get things under control, reduce the risk and the time frame involved. From from managing a business, business applications perspective, I think this kind of really speaks to the development cycles. It sort of depends on how seriously you take your internal development for your implementation. We have some clients that, they just want to do minimal. They're happy with a, small ITSM standard implementation. Others, they want to make as much use of the platform as they can. So they want to, as well as having ITSM Pro, they want to bring on board other business services such as HR and finance. So this is really where, this is where I see Automate Pro can really help, because user acceptance testing can often be one of the more complicated parts. There can be quite a few unknowns, especially when you think about negative testing. You need test scripts, documentation prepared, and also that needs to be kept up to date, when you make changes and enhancements. Are most users still testing manually? I think the answer to that really is yes. I think I touched on it already, really. And especially with the dependency on, stakeholders to test post-upgrade, especially on larger implementations. Excuse me, and wanting them to be engaged in UAT, it can be very complicated, time-consuming, and become quite expensive. And it's very difficult to test the entire platform post-upgrade, especially, like say, if you have a larger implementation. There's so many variables, there's so many modules, integrations, that it can become quite expensive, and it is very difficult. In some cases, it's best efforts testing when you're doing it manually. So regarding the limited coverage of ATF, it's not really an area of my expertise, but I am aware that there's limitations on the portal side, which is a bit of a downside given that it's the wider business-facing piece. So I think back to you now, Seamus.
No, yes, thank you very much. No, to reiterate that, ATF absolutely has its place, particularly for smaller ITSM implementations. But once we reach beyond that, and once we're talking end-to-end processes that may leave ITSM entirely, or when we're talking a more holistic platform view, we start to see creaks at times. And that coverage and that need to cover wider pieces is one of the things that comes up time and time again in meetings. The other piece is where we look at something more open source. So for example, Selenium, it's absolutely a tool that's being used across businesses. It's been very well respected for very good reasons. But one of the issues with a more SaaS-based product, particularly ServiceNow, is the sheer rate of change. Both internal changes as your team are making alterations, but also ServiceNow themselves pushing new UIs or different processes has knock-on consequences. And annoyingly, this is at the point where you can least afford them during upgrades. So having huge numbers of your tests fail at that stage causes widespread problems, and it slows down the already slow process around upgrades. What you want is to be able to run a regression and then see where your results are, and that's almost impossible at the point of an upgrade when using that. We've a couple of poll questions to ask as we've started the call. We'll run the first one now at this stage.
Yes, so now we've got a poll question. The question is a fairly straightforward one. If you could answer when you're ready. Have you had any experience with automated testing? Okay, so let's run through these questions. I have never attempted automated testing, never touched it. I've explored automated testing, but haven't implemented it. I have tried automated testing on a few projects, sort of dipped your feet in the water. I frequently use automated testing in my projects, or I am an automated testing expert with extensive experience. Just pick the option that kind of you feel matches you most. I'll give everyone a bit of time to put their answer. Okay, it'll be quite interesting to see the results of this. Okay, and let's have a look at these answers. Okay, so yeah, that's sort of in line with what we expect. So the majority of people either have explored automated testing but haven't really got around to implementing it, or have tried it on a few projects here and there. So Seamus, what are your thoughts on those answers? Is that in line with what you were expecting as well?
No, absolutely. And it lines back to what Van was saying earlier. It's people want automated testing, but they're not at the point where they are able to do it as frequently as they want to, particularly in a ServiceNow context. We are still testing manually, and this is that move. We're trying our best at this to show where the benefits can be, which there seems a receptive audience to that, but also how it's achievable and how we can make that work. There are a few things that I have no doubt most people on this call will have run into at some point, but let's just reiterate them. The reason for automation, one of the big things is saving time and costs. Upgrades are a huge part of ServiceNow. The idea that we're trying to get people to reduce their update time to make it more condensed. ServiceNow are pushing the idea that everyone should stay in wherever possible by partly business pressure. They release new things. They say you must be on the latest version. If you're not in the latest version, the business will ask you for that. It allows you the idea that with test automation, we can think about upgrading twice a year. We can think of becoming earlier adopters of upgrades. The other thing is that it eliminates a lot of the inefficiencies around the processes, both in terms of testing, but also in terms of deployment. We're moving update sets from one system to another, ensuring they work correctly on all those various systems is an effortful thing at the moment. And the key thing to all of this is that we can run tests more frequently, that we can effortlessly run these nightly as we're doing them and keep up to date with what we've signed off in UAT being retested as we're going along our processes. One of the key things here is this allows us to reduce risk. So we're not simply talking about, can I move code through a system fast? What we're saying is quality, governance, compliance. Depending on what industry you're in, these are either core to what you're doing, or if you're expanding in ServiceNow, the mentions of things like finance and HR will always make you more in need of looking at governance and compliance because they come with their own needs and requirements. Business processes don't just sit in one box. So being able to test that sort of end-to-end business process is a key thing that you need to be able to do. And through automation, you can be running those more frequently. And this allows also compliance-ready documentation. So this could be as simple as who signed this off and where did they work when audits happen, but also if you're subject to more regular or rigorous checks, this is available. And this makes it easier to comply with what you're dealing with. From a really important thing, there's a really big benefit here. We can see faster time to value with ServiceNow. Now that's both in terms of your teams implementing things, but also entire projects being able to be unlocked by the fact that you've now got extra capacity to do some of this work. Teams are continuously asking for changes and features and additions. Being able to deliver that really helps us get there. Faster release cycles allow that end goal of seeing the ServiceNow dream that has been pushed to the business actually start to be achievable. When we're actually looking at automated tests, one of the biggest things to remember is what they're the alternative to. Good manual test scripts are time consuming to write. They can be quite tedious at times because you're writing down things that you're trying to do, and that's no one likes narrating their life. One of the things about running them is that if you're running the same thing, particularly on a sprint by sprint basis, it becomes quite tedious. And that increases the likelihood of human error because the user who has to look at the same screen as different users 3 or 4 times may miss something. There's also a risk of inaccuracy. Unless you're a very, very detailed team, there's a likelihood that there isn't a central recording of results from previously to look back in history and find that centralized information. One of the great advantages of automated regression testing in particular is that we can achieve full platform coverage. We can see the various parts integrating. It can be repeatable. It can run as frequently as you want to. Daily, even if we're in a non-co-located teams, we could have it run at the end of everyone's day so that we're always seeing what's going on, better visibility on what's happening. And this gives us an accurate trend of what's been happening on that system. If there are certain modules that continuously run into problems during development cycles, that gives us the understanding that there may need to be different points added to those in our sort of agile story pointing. And when we do run into problems, we can identify them quickly. Automated defects being raised means that we can understand exactly what's gone wrong and try to mitigate them as quickly as we can. And this accelerates the overall testing cycle, allows the business to see the benefit of all the development work that's being done. Chris, what would you say is sort of best practices around building automated tests?
Yeah, absolutely. So the key thing really when you sort of approach test building, it's one of the common questions I get is just what do you test? You know, ServiceNow is a very big platform. You know, where do you begin? Um, so the key thing is to not set out to test the entire platform straight away. You know, you focus on those sort of key critical areas. You do a bit of a by prioritization of the processes. You know, what's going to affect my upgrades? You know, where are my customizations? Right, they're the key areas. If you've got a very kind of custom portal, that kind of thing. What are key areas that are good for automation, like repeatable processes? You know, all of those quite tedious things to test, like complex forms and repeated processes. So you've got to do a bit of analysis on, you know, where's my customizations? What are our users doing? What are our like most submitted catalog items, or what are our key modules? You know, sort of look to the business and say what's most important for them day to day as a stakeholder. So there's a variety of areas that go into deciding what you should be testing. But the next question, the key one really is how do I test? You know, what's the right way to test? You know, you get the tool, you get an automated testing tool, but you know, where do you begin? What's your approach? And the key thing that I like to hone in on is this concept of persona users, right? So creating test users, you know, users that should replicate real users in a real environment, right? So I create an ITIL user with the ITIL role, an approver who has the right groups of my real approvers, because you're working in sub-production here. So we go for that over impersonation. I see a lot of people doing impersonation when doing testing. The accuracy of that is limited. You're not really replicating that sort of realistic scenario of a user logging in with their credentials going through the system. You've still got that sort of admin permissions that you have in the background when you impersonate. So we recommend creating persona users for all the processes and the users that you need. So that you're really kind of testing in the voice of the user. So that's just a bit about, you know, building automated tests. But let's move on to test execution. So running them, Seamus.
Absolutely, Chris. Yeah, so one of the key things is that if we're running manual testing or traditional approaches, we are quite reactive in what we're doing. So what we're doing is we tend to just run the test for that particular user story as it come in. We're checking how it's working. And that means that if there's a knock on, if, for example, we're making edits to the CMDB, we can have impacts elsewhere. And this means that we can end up with situations where we're finding these issues for the first time in production. Now, why does this matter? Because everything's more expensive once you reach that stage. Shift left has long been pushed in the industry for good reason, because the earlier you find defects, the cheaper they are to fix. And the secondary problem is reactive testing, as you're saying, it slows down how frequently we want to take the fixes and changes from ServiceNow, which means effectively we end up paying for new technology in ServiceNow that we don't have access to because we haven't reached the newest version. We haven't reached what we want to see. So again, it's unlocking that potential when we're coming from. Now, one of the advantages of automated testing is we can be quite proactive. We can actively search out that our business processes are still working. We can run in parallel so we can see everything that's going on. The ability to run these regression tests that could be days and days of manual effort in hours. We can come in each day and find our full regression pack. And that could be several hundred days worth of manual effort being run every night. So you can see exactly what's going on. And that unlocks a key thing that we consider, which is being upgrade ready. Now, this includes family upgrades, absolutely, that we talked about. Do you want to do 1 or 2 a year? But also the patch upgrades and plugin changes, etc. ServiceNow are making more and more changes that are pushed to you. Are you ready to receive them? Are you in a position where that's going to damage your development cycle? And by being upgrade ready, we don't have those concerns to nearly the same extent. Chris, in terms of actually executing these tests, would you have any best practices to share with the group?
Yeah, absolutely. So you know, when running tests, a common question is, you know, where should you do your testing, particularly with automated testing. You know, as a ServiceNow customer, you have a lot of environments, you know, dev, test, prod stage, you know, where should you really be doing your testing? And what I recommend is like selecting an environment that is the closest match to production, right? So you're cloning regularly, or hopefully cloning relatively regularly. You want the environment that's sort of production-like, you know, that could be your test, QA stage. You don't want an environment that's kind of very in flux with a lot of kind of in progress work. Of course, you can test across instances, but that's where we'd recommend to focus your testing, that sort of UAT. Let's test these processes before they reach production and have a similar environment so we catch the same kind of defects that real end users will come across. Another question really is when to test, right? Or a better way of wording it would be how frequently. And with regression testing in general, the important thing is to test as frequently as you have changes going into the system as a kind of bare minimum. But with automated testing, that lets you do it as frequently as you want to, really. I could have a whole suite of tests and run them weekly, nightly, some like every few hours or on demand. So it's really up to you, really, as to how frequently tests are run. But yeah, as your sort of minimum baseline, as frequently as you're making changes. If you're making deployments to your test instance every like Tuesday, make sure your regression is done around that time. Now we'll move on to talking through test maintenance.
Yes, no, test maintenance is absolutely a key aspect of any move. Now, this is, of course, something that's equally true in manual testing. We have to keep tests up to date. And one of the key things here is where you have written tests in great detail and the end user can't do the thing you're asking them to, there's a good chance that they'll select something nearby to it or adjacent to the story. Now, why is this a problem? Because in some ways, these test cases can be obsolete. You're not testing quite what you expected to. Unexpected changes have reached your process. And they can have a problem with, we're only as good as the last time that test passed correctly. You can have obsolete tests that are, very pretty to look at, but they're not actually adding any value to your use. They can be ineffective because they're not covering what you were hoping they would. And this can really have a knock-on because it means you're hampering the ability to identify critical problems. If we don't know what's wrong, it becomes remarkably difficult to fix that core problem. And this can have an impact of the overall reliability of the platform, because when something goes wrong, we could be running into legacy issues that we would have been able to fix very easily, but now they're masking a bigger problem. One of the things about automated tests, and the way we've implemented it, is that we've made it much, much easier to maintain. We can make a change using model blocks that the conversation around Chris will show later as well, but these idea of reusable sub-processes. So we can make small changes and impact lots of tests and keep things in line that way. The other thing is we provide a library of actions and checks. So for example, type into field will work in multiple UIs. It keeps it upgrade proof in how we're working. And this is really important to ensure that we're actually able to maintain these tests, keep them at a standard that keeps us going back to the previous point, that upgrade ready. Because as long as those tests are working and meant to pass, that gives us a better baseline for when we start seeing failures to be able to track down exactly what's going on. Chris, would you have any good tips around maintaining tests?
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic and sort of one of the most important for me, really, as we're sort of helping customers get up and running with testing, is how do you maintain them, right? It's like it's all well and good being able to build the test quickly, but what about 3 months from now or 6 months from now? ServiceNow in particular is a very sort of dynamic, sort of ever-changing system. You've always got these enhancements going in, new features, defect fixes, that kind of thing. So it's how do you maintain that at scale, right? If you've got a large test pack of automated tests, it's all actually was mentioned about those kind of reusable components, right? I should be able to mass update my tests if I've got changes going into a system. I want those things to change. It's intentional, so it shouldn't have to be work or a lot of work to maintain them. So when you update those reusable components, it sort of mass updates everywhere. I'll show that shortly, and that's sort of the goal really with building automated testing is thinking ahead to having to maintain them when you change your system. But also, and sort of related to it, this is it's like, well, who maintains them? And it's sort of assigning a role for someone to come in day out and check the results, right? Look at that dashboard of tests, or look at the test report that's been generated, and sort of identify those failures and take action. You know, raise it with the developer if there's a defect that's been found, or if there's an enhancement that's gone into the system, update those blocks, make it someone's task to do that. You know, keep those tests updated as well. So yeah, that's a really good topic for automated testing. And now we'll also move on to documentation.
Yes. Yeah, so one of the key things that we, as an industry, got worse and worse at over time has been documentation. It used to be that IT spec manuals were fairly reliable and non-farm, and as we have gone more agile and gone faster, they've generally fallen to the bottom of to-do lists, to the point that often we don't have documentation, or if we do, it's outmoded, or its UI is not to the one that we're currently using. And this really does negatively affect the user experience. If you can't find out what you're meant to do, it becomes remarkably difficult to get that information. Now, why is this important? Because if we can keep this documentation up to date, we can create it and make it available at a click of a button. So any process can have corresponding supporting documentation. This really helps for internal knowledge transfer. If you have someone who needs to be in charge of a new process and the previous user has left, being able to find out that can be nigh on impossible at times. But by having this documentation there, we can make everyone available know what they need to know to be able to do their job or to do the testing in those processes. The other thing is it also means that end users aren't as lost when we're trying to do this. And we can give a level of documentation at the end of every sprint, so that when we have to get people to do UAT, their starting point is, here's a working process, and here's the information that you would need to be able to carry on your job. Chris, would you have any best practices around user documentation?
Yeah, exactly. So as I was sort of talking through earlier about the concept of persona users, you know, creating specific users, you know, ITIL user, change manager, change approver, GRC policy user, you know, all of these persona users for your processes, that lends itself really well to documentation. You know, if you're looking at a user guide or a training document and you start seeing people's like names in it, and you see like login as Joe Blogs, it doesn't really mean anything to someone who's looking through a user guide. When you've got those specific persona users, you can sort of log in as them, get those screenshots from your tests, and it makes the document look clear and easy to follow. Another key thing with documentation is maintaining it, right? Like, again, as I was talking about last time, you're constantly like changing your system, even doing drastic, aggressive changes, like moving to different UIs and things. And so documentation in particular can quickly look out of date, even if there's like a new field that's not been shown yet in your guidance. So a key thing with that is keeping documentation up to date in parallel with your testing, and I'll show that in a bit.
Thanks, Chris. Handing on to Pamela to talk a little bit about the public sector and where we've seen particular issues.
Sure. So at Flyform, we've a lot of public sector clients, and we often see similar challenges. So legacy systems is a common one, although I'm sure not isolated to the public sector, where a system's been bought for a specific purpose or a specific business service. So these systems are not necessarily interacting, and they're usually built in silos. They can become a maintenance issue and also become costly. So this includes hiring and keeping the people with the skills to manage the systems. And often the reporting capabilities are varied and sometimes limited. So that in particular is a big problem for government departments and agencies that need to adhere to strict compliance, security regulations, and where auditing and transparency are key. Next slide, please. So ServiceNow can help because it can consolidate services, data, processes all into a single platform, which helps join up the dots for teams and departments for improved visibility and vastly improved workflow to support business processes. Once you've got the platform in place, you can use the configuration management database, the common services data model, to standardize data and reporting, and this all supports auditing and transparency. Personally, I find ServiceNow a very user-friendly tool. I find the user interface in particular is very intuitive, especially the employee portal where, information and processes are well structured, grouped together, easily accessible. And best practice in ServiceNow is no code, low code. So it can be much more easily maintained and used by people who have a less technical focus. Additionally, the automation capability available in ServiceNow is very powerful, and it can free up people for more strategic or different work. And when it comes to testing, in reference to automation, if you use a tool such as Automate Pro, it just means it really gives you easier, repeatable regression testing. Obviously, the documentation and user guides are available there, and there's a general overall reduction in human error. Next slide, please. So where does platform fit in? Well, we're a long-standing elite ServiceNow partner with a strong background in public sector organizations. We're also one of the few pure play ServiceNow consulting firms that I touched on earlier. We've completed lots of projects with public sector clients, and so we have a really solid understanding of their needs for security, transparency, accountability regarding data processes and their IT investment. We also understand and we have experience of the efficiencies that are to be gained by using a tool like Automate Pro. Okay, so I'm just going to hand over now for the second poll back to Sandra.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've got another question here for everyone. So what is the main area you could improve on when it comes to ServiceNow testing or upgrades? So we've got a few areas here: documentation creation, test coverage, speed to upgrade or test, or reducing the risk of downtime or defects, or maybe all of the above. So I'll give you a bit of time to pick the one that's most appropriate. Awesome, looking forward to seeing the results of these. Perfect, let's take a look at the results. All right, it's an interesting one. So it's a split evenly between test coverage and all of the above. So was that what you were expecting, Seamus?
Yeah, so there is definitely different drivers within test automation and just generally trying to get these things to work. The all of the above answer is something that we come across previously, because these are all things that we do see as drivers. Test coverage, we've seen occasionally, and for things, that being a great driver of things, because we need to report how much coverage we have. We want to make sure that we're overall doing this. One of the things that we've seen, particularly in the more regular space, is that traceability. I have done a load of work. What are the tests I have to back that up? So we've got demands in ServiceNow. It might be in Agile 2.0, it might be in CF, it might be even in Jira. And we need to say these stories relate to these test cases. And that's something we've tried our best to ensure that we've got high quality reporting on that, and to make that as easy as possible. But no, we should no further ado, move on towards Chris's demo.
Yeah, so where does Automate Pro come into this? We've talked a fair bit about it so far. The first thing I'm going to show you in a bit is the control consoles, right? So viewing your metrics, viewing your regression results, it's very important, right? Seeing those results and seeing them in a clear way that you can sort of act on them. Another key thing we'll be generating the tests. So I'll show you a feature called Quick Start AI, where I'll be sort of generating an automated test, and I'll show you how you go about doing that and creating all the steps for you as we see here. Another thing I'll show you is viewing the tests, right? Playing them back, be able to do that sort of UAT thing and really be able to see everything that's happening on the test as well. And finally, monitoring, right? Keeping an eye on key processes, critical things, things you might have running like every hour. Are my API integrations working as I expect them to? Is our production available? Monitors for your key sort of critical processes that you really want to know about straight away as soon as they fail. Okay, so let me just jump into the demo. 1 second. There we go. Right, so hopefully you can see that. So where should we begin with this? So as you can see here, I'm in my catalog. I've got hundreds of catalog items. This is just one of our demo instances, but that's the reality in a lot of ServiceNow spaces, is the whole catalog. Where do you begin with it? As I said, you do that analysis, which are the most submitted, which do people use the most, and then what you do is create the tests. You'd think that'd be a very time-consuming thing. With Automate Pro, you just generate them. You generate the test. So I'll show you that now. Okay, so we close that, and we've got my control console, right? So this is the home page. Viewing your metrics. How did our test do this week compared to last week for HR or service operations workspace? So being able to see those key metrics at a glance, seeing all of my regression packs that ran. How did my change do yesterday? Is there any red that I need to investigate? So we'll take a look at some of those defects shortly as well, and how we handle defects. And yeah, really having an overview of your system. But to start with, let's say, day one, we've picked the catalog items that I want to test. To start with, my sort of critical ones, where do I begin? Right? How do I do that? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill out a form, and it will generate that test. Right, so I'm going to give it some details. Let's say I'll test the developer Mac item. If you recall what I was talking about earlier about persona users, creating users for the particular scenario. So I'll pick like the standard requester with no roles. So this is my sort of realistic end user who's accessing the portal. Right, I'll pick one of my blocks, one of my reusable blocks as well. So let's have a look through these. I'll pick one that will take me to the service catalog. Then I'll pick my catalog category, let's say hardware, pick my catalog item, say developer Mac, and I'll give it a template record. So I'm going to say, right, look at this template record and create a test based on that record. So I've just picked a written in my system, and it'll create a test based on that written. And I'll add in all the validations and hit generate. So this is where we're talking about no code testing. That there's no code involved. It's aimed at sort of BAs or people like that, or process owners, people who just want to sort of build tests without having to get into any sort of technical world. So if I jump into that test and we can have a look at what's been created, we can see we've got those steps here, right? So I've got steps here to log in, navigate to the catalog, and then submit that request item. If I expand that, we can see all of those steps to submit the item. I can even see all of the checks, right? So the validations for every single field, whether it's displayed, mandatory, read-only. So we've got a sort of fairly good configuration test here. How do I then turn this into an end-to-end test, right? That's the important thing that I want to achieve here. We've got all these very complex, like end-to-end flows. How we handle that is with blocks. Okay, so I've got all of my blocks for my reusable processes, like I was talking about earlier, maintaining the tests, right? So I've got my blocks here built out. So maybe now that we've submitted the item, I need to log in, let's say as an approver, and approve that request. So maybe you're the user's manager, right? So to approve their hardware request. Then maybe I log in as an agent with the ITIL role, and they go in and just do some of the catalog tasks. Right, so I'll drag that in. I'll drag it in twice because there's like 2 tasks to be completed, and then maybe they confirm that the written has auto closed. That is my end-to-end test. So that's where you want to get to with automated testing, right? So I've done the creation of the test. I can maintain them because I've got these blocks that I can mass update if anything changes in my system. I just update the steps, publish those, and it mass updates my my suite of automated tests. Now I want to run the test. Okay, so all I'm going to do is hit create test run. Okay, so I'm going to execute my test. And again, I can point it at any environment that I want to. Again, probably want to do it against the closest match to production, but I'll just kick off that test. Okay, so I'll execute that test. There's no sort of technical setup, right? It's all happening in the background. I don't need to wait for a server to be available or anything like that. And I can run these tests in parallel, 5, 10, 15, 20, I've really got that sort of scalability with test execution. So you can see that one's now started running. Okay, so I'll let that run. We're a little pushed for time, so I'll do the quick version of the rest of this. And let me hop back to the console and show you a failed test. So I'll go into my regression. We can see something that failed, right? So I've got a failed test here. I can open up my viewer like so, and I could just hit play. Okay, so we've got a carousel viewer that will show you the test, and someone can really just play it back. I can actually make that a bit bigger. There we go. Play back the process in that viewer. You can use it for things like training, UAT, things like that, to review the process, right? So you've got a highlighted screenshot of everything that's happening on that page with our Alcoa compliant screenshots, right? So these kind of things are really important for test evidence, which I'll touch on shortly, right? So I've then got an auto-generated defect from my system. So I can review that defect. I've got the expected result, the reason why it failed, and a screenshot as well attached to the record. So what I'll do to show this is I will create a test report. Okay, so that's a really important thing here, is test evidence, right? So I could just generate that report. I'll click of a button, and it will show me everything that happened in that test. To really get that sort of breakdown, that traceability, really, which environment, who ran it, when they ran it, which version of ServiceNow was it run against, which patch was it run against, things like that. And you get that sort of granular detail of everything that happened in your test. This is where we talk about compliance, right? I've got all this evidence here of our testing when we did it, and also evidence of my defects within my report with the screenshots, right? Time-stamped as well. Okay, so that's the test evidence aspect of it as well. I can also, if I want to, generate documentation, right? So I can create user guides and things like that. So if I jump into one I made earlier, let's open one of these, view the document. I've also got a user guide that's just been generated from my test, right? So I've got all these steps from my test with these screenshots as well from that test that I can just sort of include or choose to exclude as well. Okay, and then we bring it all together with the control console as your kind of dashboard to show those key metrics and run like a pack of tests as well, run all of my workspace tests or my change tests, initiate them and execute them all in parallel. That was a very, very quick whistle-stop tour of the product. There's a lot more to it. I just wanted to give you a taste of what's included within that. Right, I'll hop back to the presentation. Hope you found that useful. Seamus, do you want to sort of wrap this up with the benefits of that?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so one of the key things to bear in mind here is what we're trying to do is ensure high quality releases. This works within your ServiceNow, it lives within your ServiceNow modules. It's designed to give you that ability to run your tests nightly or as frequently as you want to find defects before you hit business impact. It unlocks the ability in future to move to something more akin to a CI/CD model, regardless of how regulated your industry is, because we can include the approvals and appropriate steps to ensure that this is all being done correctly, everything to become documented, and this allows us that ability to monitor what we're doing for business critical applications, real-time monitoring, both in terms of performance, but also in terms of security and ensuring that we'll meet the right users have access to this. We do have a couple of questions that come in. I'm conscious of the time, but I will make sure that we cover a couple of them. One question that's come in terms of limitations with ATF. I don't want to go into too much detail just because of time, but I would suggest that while Cloud Runner has absolutely exacerbated some of the problems that existed previously, there are limitations within a testing sphere, particularly when you leave ITSM. It is something that we'll happily have a deeper conversation with if you wish to reach out to any of our representatives, and we'll schedule a demo or a more detailed session, but that is one for that. Question each for, well, one each for Chris and Pam. For Chris, for your perspective, when would we look at doing a test for automation rather than looking at it doing it manually? What would be your criteria for choosing this?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually, and there's a lot to that really. So when you're looking to automate, as I mentioned it earlier, a key thing is those sort of repetitive processes. You know, I've got to, as a tester, fill out 50 forms as part of our testing. Well, let's automate that. You know, a manual test, there's absolutely value in manual testing still, but you would want to sort of look at the look and feel of something. You know, what does it look like? Is the font correct or something? You're looking for automated testing for those sorts of configuration testing as a sort of key thing. You know, are my business rules firing when I expect them to? Does the field become mandatory when it's supposed to? Does this integration happen when I expect it to? That should all be automated. Everything that takes time away from the manual testing, to give people time to just sort of, you know, look at the Washington and say, you know, the look and feel, what has changed. Leave all the boring stuff to your regression testing and have that find anything that's important for your upgrade, right? You just want to throw everything into an automated regression pack. Think, what's going to be a challenge for upgrade testing? What can I not have breaking during my upgrades? What was breaking before during my previous upgrades? And focus on those areas for automated testing.
I'll loop you back in for wrapping these things up. Just realizing we're conscious of time.
Hi again, everyone. I just want to say thank you to our presenters, Pamela, Seamus, and Chris. That was a really insightful presentation, and thank you to our attendees. We really hope you found the information useful. If you would like more information, please do head over to the Automate Pro website where you can request a demo. Other than that, I wish you a good remainder of your day, and again, thank you for attending. Bye all.